Codependence. I received a couple of messages overnight asking me to talk about codependence in a meditation video. Good morning, it's Lauren. Rise and shine. It's Sunday morning. Very bright sun here, and it's a beautiful morning. It seems that there are some sheep that have jumped over the fence, so that's all interesting. And Adrian's gone to return a truck back to the depot. I was thinking about the word codependence and how, if at all, I could talk about it in a meditation. What is our aim here? Our primary aim in talking about codependence? What are we looking for? Basically, we're looking for a level of peace, a level of satisfaction, a level of perceived success in our life. Bingo, let's close the fairy tale. We've arrived at a happy ending. I've talked about the problem of social media. Social media takes a word or a phrase and that's my Evil Dead moment, and smashes it up. And then somehow we, all of us, me included, we're starting to see these short messages and short words on Instagram or whatever the social media is as a type of answer. There's nothing more motivating than a wonderful quote, and I love it too. I love it. Or a strong word, profound, incredible. Then we need to look at the purpose of words and not being controlled by the word. So we are the I, we choose the thought chooses the word. And that is a complex process because our process of choice is affected by so many variables. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? You choose, it's your choice. A choice is affected by how we feel about ourselves, the parameters of that subculture. If we're at work, we can't choose to do anything. We can't choose to suddenly walk around with the toilet roll on our head at work because work has certain values. The concept of freedom of choice is a myth. That does not mean we have no freedom of choice or we are without freedom of choice, but we come back to the base that we are social. I'm going to write that down. Social. What does that mean? We are like my horses. One horse will be an individual. As soon as there's two, they start being a herd. When they're four, they're prone to being a little bit silly, and they can run or gallop or canter without checking whether there are fences and whether there are stones. When I've been part of a running group, one of the things I truly noticed was that when we would go for runs, if we reached a road and the first person crossed, often the others would cross without looking. This aspect of being social is biological. It's within us. We are genetically social, not predisposed to being social. We're social. Now, we can be introverts within our social paradigm, or we can be extroverts. We can have a degree of individuality within this paradigm, but we are not free. If you look at the definition of freedom, it's do whatever you want, whenever you want. Freedom is a bit of a myth on so many levels. Let's come back to codependence. I'm writing this down for me. And I have taken some notes, but I'd like to be really clear here. The word codependence, as many words, go through a fashion, contemporary fashion. Sometimes we like to use words, sometimes they're no longer in our favour socially. At the moment, we use words such as toxicity, phrases such as go no contact. These words 10 years ago were not used. They weren't used. Now they are popular. It doesn't mean these words have no value, but we need to be careful not to simplify our brains. Our brains are complex, and that's what's beautiful about the brains, about our brain. I'm going back to that horror theme, aren't I? So, codependence, what does it mean? It means for one or more people to be dependent upon each other. That is the literal meaning of codependence. A healthy human being depends upon other human beings in some shape or form. If we don't have interdependence in some level, to some degree, if there is no interdependence, you could argue that somebody was a sociopath if they do not subscribe to any levels of interdependence, codependence, demonstrated ongoing empathy, compassion, then they're sociopaths. If there is no interdependence, there is no care, no compassion. Now, psychologically, the word codependence has evolved to mean something else now. It has evolved to mean excessive codependence. Too much, over, extreme. Is that what codependence actually means? No. Codependence can be healthy. If we have no interaction, engagement, any play between two people, that is not mentally stable. If we have too much, that may not be mentally stable. What is mental stability? It's like having a cold. We all are prone to going in and out of mental stability. Mental stability is not a label. We are not mentally stable and then mentally unstable. There are colours, greys, levels of mental stability. The ability to be codependent, depend on another person in certain ways so that there are agreement on values, agreement on commitments, agreement on possibly fidelity, agreements on acceptable behaviours, codependence. That can be healthy. Coming back to the popular definition of codependence, which is excessive. Just coming to my notes now. Healthy versus unhealthy codependence. Even the word healthy is a word we can play with. I think it's so important that we use words rather than the words use us. If we say a relationship is toxic, we are minimizing and labeling a complex paradigm. That may serve our purpose. It might. That might be okay. But we need to question, does this allow my brain to be the beautiful, complex concept that it is? Does this belief help me see all the colours of the rainbow in life, in society, in relationships? Does this concept limit my ability to include? Does this concept keep me safe? Whatever the concept is, whether it's the word toxicity, the phrase go no contact, which is a popular phrase. I have little to no opinion about the phrase. I have an opinion about how the phrase is used. Okay, so healthy and unhealthy, where one person, if we're going with pop cultural definition of excessive dependence, where one person excessively depends on another so that the relationship has a clear lack of balance. And we need to really think through this process. So when our elders, our grandparents or whatever get older and they may get a chronic disease or they may have Alzheimer's or they may, because of age, maybe they repeat themselves, they become dependent. That is not excessive codependence. We need to be careful not to use the word to rationalize us not helping others. If we have someone that's in a coma that needs care for, if we have someone that's suffering grief following death, if we have a student upstairs doing their exams, they may need us to take their food up. Teenagers need careful parenting. There are so many stages in life where there's lack of balance. It's not about balance per se. It's about each person being allowed to be the greatest version of themselves. And if we adopt a word like codependence in a particular way, we can possibly rationalize turning our back on people. Now, I'm not saying it's not okay to turn our back on people. I'm saying pause, reflect. Let's not be pulled into the Mexican wave of social media thinking. Let's think. Am I really the one choosing the thought here, or am I being swept up into the mainstream? Oh my goodness, what happened there? I have times in life where I look back and think, how did I actually do that? Why did I get swept up into thinking for a moment or saying for moments in time stuff that isn't me? We're so prone to that. We are so prone to that as animals, as human animals. And we need to forgive ourselves, but also unpack. All right, psychological aspects. If we are feeling insecure for any particular reason, and we all do. If we feel anxious, depressed, if we have past traumatic experiences, this may lead to imbalanced relationships. So remember, it is basically impossible to have balance. It's always a moving tide. The banks of a stream are ever moving. The tides are ever changing, depending on so many things. So balance is a myth, but we can move towards balance with compassion, care, and look at so many things, the stages of the lifespan. If somebody is a teenager or a person is below the age of 25, where their brain has finally formed, we need to allow for their lack of experience in life. We have a duty of care to our elderly. We can't say, oh, my grandma is codependent. Go off, grandma. Go off into the wilderness. Start being independent. Our whole society is built on a number of codependent relationships so that we look after each other. It is complex. Beware the open quotes, short, close quotes of social media. Because if we are not careful, we will become a short. Like a fish, we will think in terms of shorts, like in Nemo with Dory that swims around and around. Practice being complex. Take a belief you have and argue the opposite. And if you cannot find an argument to argue the opposite of what you truly believe, then what you truly believe is flawed. There is always two sides. I like doing that because I find it a fun game if I'm really passionately believing in something. Signs of codependence is or may be difficulty setting boundaries, a constant need for approval, need to compare, and feeling responsible for other people's feelings. So let's look at that. Difficulty setting boundaries, a constant need for approval or to compare yourself to others, and feeling responsible for others or other people's feelings. That is also human. That's also quite normal. We all, as social beings, want to compare. We all lack feelings of self-worth. It is very normal. So the point where that becomes too much, excessive, I don't know. You don't know. We need to look at it in a case-by-case approach. Somebody, a friend of yours, let's make up this friend, Tamara we'll call her, has been traumatized as a child, had good parents, but perhaps one of those parents slapped her or didn't listen to her or didn't validate her or would stop talking to her for days at a time or would exclude her or not listen to her or not validate her, perhaps. Tamara, then Tamara may grow up with an excessive need to be approved, may compare herself, and may be a people pleaser. But Tamara may also be your best friend who is there when other people are not there when you're struggling. So do we label Tamara or do we appreciate her for who she is? I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. It's individual. Each answer is unique in its own paradigm of that particular situation. It's very important as we walk through life that we set boundaries. It's really important. It's really important that we attempt not to compare ourselves, but then we go easy on ourselves when we do. We're all like, oh, the grass is greener. We are all like that. We can attempt not to be, work in progress, good on you, but let's go easy on ourselves. And I think our role as friends to each other is to say, hey, why don't you go easy on yourself? Because I know I'm so hard on myself. I know that I take life too seriously. I'm very intense. I know I'm perceived by others as being intense, and I'm an unusual character. So we all want a sense of belonging to society. But if we truly belong, there's nothing special about us. There's nothing unique, and there's nothing about us that leads us to stand apart from the crowd and stand up for other people's needs. So someone that truly belongs is not a compassionate person by definition. So boundaries are a work in progress. So being codependent can impact our mental health, but so can the weather. I'm not minimizing this. I'm trying to emphasize the complexity of it. Strategies for balance may be setting boundaries or learning to set boundaries. Self-reflection, the ability to self-reflect on a particular situation, and possibly seeking therapy. Seeking therapy is something interesting because as soon as we seek therapy, we focus on the concept of me or I. If we focus on the concept of me or I, we can lose the concept of we. So that's a careful balance, one we need to be aware of when we seek therapy. Now, I agree with therapy. I'm a therapist, and I often attend therapy myself. But as we go to therapy, as we attend therapy, we need to be aware that it is generally an individual process. And we're not individuals. We're a herd animal. So there's that careful process. And I agree with therapy. I'm a big one for therapy. So strategies for balance, boundaries, self-reflection, journaling, talking to yourself in the mirror, unpacking your day in a way that is proactive. They have the word, what is the word, prodependence instead of codependence, which really, it's a nice word, I like the word, but pro just means good, proactive, positive. These words don't have any inherent meaning other than the meaning we give them. The word good and bad is just a word, you could say a controlling word to lead us to want to do something or not to do something. We need to be so careful not to give words too much power. Okay, so there are deal breakers here. So there's deal breakers or definite examples or when someone is too codependent. When one person coercively controls, when one person has narcissistic traits, and I mean pathological narcissistic traits, not the pop cultural narcissism. When one person excessively controls another, or one person uses the lack of self-esteem of another and strategizes it in order to create an agenda. Now, everything we do has an agenda and everything we do has an aim. But when somebody strategically aims to control another person, financial control, violence, rumour mongering, using flying monkeys in order to affect another person. These are deal breakers. They're different. So you've got setting boundaries with normal behavior, and setting boundaries is about you, not controlling the other person. It's about you setting your boundaries. And then there is deal breakers. I like the word deal breakers because it really means what it means. Too much. Sexual assault, violence, financial control, coercion. That's too far. When we assess what is codependent and what is not, we keep in mind that we want a paradigm where each person can thrive within community. We want a paradigm where each person feels included in a safe, secure community. But we don't want anything that mirrors George Orwell's 1984, or where we all have to wear the same uniform, or where we all have to be the same. So on the one hand, we want the individual to flourish within society, but that does not mean being the same. So really, I'm talking about something highly complex. I'm talking about the shores of the ocean that are ever moving, tides ever moving, or the banks of a river or a stream. I had a property in Queensland that I just loved, and the boundaries of the property were ever moving because the stream was ever moving, and I found that interesting to try and work out whether the boundary was in the middle of the stream or at the edge of the stream. And then there would be flooding, and that would change the banks, which is an interesting metaphor, really. We might have flooding in life where someone has a baby, or where someone's dying, or where someone has a chronic illness. The flooding is everything changes, the boundaries change, the lines in the sand change. Whatever happens, we always need to look after our marginalised. We always need to reach a hand out to our neighbour. We always need to look after people that are displaced. This is not codependence. This is raw humanity at its best. Let's be careful of the word codependence. I'm not saying don't use it. I use it constantly. Let's be careful. How do we grow through codependence ourselves? We self-reflect on what we've been through. We acknowledge that parts of our caregiving or the way our parents treated us led us to patterns of wanting to compare, people-pleasing, or whatever else. We forgive ourselves and work through that process. We try to cut the ties with certain relationships and allow ourselves to grieve. When we bond with somebody, we, if we're healthy, release oxytocin, which is like a drug. So when the bond breaks, we need to go through withdrawal of the drug, of oxytocin. So whether the relationship was positive or negative, and they're simple terms, you know what I think of those, we need to grieve. With all healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships, when there is an ending, there is a grief, and that's okay. It's not a reflection on whether the relationship was positive or negative. We form ties, connections, bonds. We produce hormones in order to continue those bonds. And when the bond breaks, there still often is a desire to be with that person. Go easy on yourself. Allow time. Self-care, self-care, self-care. Look after yourself. Everything changes. If you feel that life is hard right now, make yourself a cup of tea. The tea won't solve the problem. It'll buy you time. Everything looks different in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 24 hours. Allow your loved ones the opportunity to be hysterical, to cry, to sob, to reach out, to ask for help. Time changes everything. Allow people to be who they are. and you be who you are. Codependence is part of the changing tides of life. And we can all do it by reaching a hand out to those around us and protecting ourselves when required, and seeing life as complex. And that complexity is beautiful.